чути чи ні. Всім доброго ранку. Я дуже рада, що ми сьогодні зібралися всі разом. Тема сьогоднішнього семінару надзвичайно важлива, адже ми живемо в такому мінливому суспільстві, у мінливому часі, і нам потрібно зараз спрямувати наші зусилля саме на те, як запам'ятати і передати наші спогади майбутнім поколінням. При цьому не травмуючи їх, але максимально зберегти, і аби вони змогли в подальшому не повторювати помилок, які були зроблені. Тому я дуже рада, що ми сьогодні зібралися з вами. І я запрошую до участі нашого першого спікера Клементін Блато. Будь ласка. Це експерт нашого фонду «Партнерство за сильну Україну». І сьогодні вона вам розкаже англійською мовою, проведе свою лекцію. Тому, будь ласка, Клементін, я тебе запрошую сюди. Передаю тобі слово.
Would it be possible to get the first presentation, please? It's the one titled Inclusive and Trauma-Informed Memory Culture. Oh, sorry. Thank you. So thank you everyone for having me. Thank you to the Ukrainian Institute of National Remembrance for inviting me to speak today about inclusive memory work. I am sorry, but I do not speak Ukrainian, unfortunately. So as Valeria mentioned, the presentation will be in English, but my colleague Victor will provide tremendous translation with the device you were given. But if I'm speaking too fast, please just signal and I'll make sure that I slow down. So today we are, I think, 6 speakers, and we all talk about different aspects of memory work. And my own presentation, which will last approximately 1 hour, will focus on 2 areas: how can memory work promote social cohesion in Ukraine, and how it can promote a form of healing for those who are living under those dire circumstances. So it will be mostly a presentation format, but I will take questions whenever you have ones, and also I can... Sorry, we are having small difficulties with the presentation. Sorry. But yes, feel free to ask questions during the presentation. We will have a couple of minutes at the end to address concerns, remarks, questions. And also, my colleagues are here from the Institute. Will moderate a question and answers, thank you, session at the end of the day. So today with you, I would like to explore how memory work can promote recognition, and memorialize different lived realities in Ukraine, and especially in Чернігові region. And also how it can be a form of healing, I would even go as far as saying therapy, for those who lived under the war since 2014. So how we will discuss this question today: first, we'll take a look at international best practices, as well as standards on inclusivity, on trauma-informed approaches to memory work. We'll also explore the question of needs and priorities for Чернігів Oblast. What are the projects that exist there in terms of memory? What are the challenges they met? And how they overcame those? And we'll particularly take a look at some of our partners at the Partnership Fund for Resilient Ukraine, which are Association for Democratic Development and the Northern Cultural Capital Association, because those are two civil society organizations currently working on memory in Чернігів Oblast. And I think one of my objectives for today, and also I think it's shared by my colleagues from the Institute and other panelists, is to start building a network of potential partners between you today, representative of civil society, representative of public institutions, so that we can better support memory initiatives that are being undertaken in Чернігові. So we'll delve into the matter of memory work today. We'll explain a bit better what it is, because it's an over-encompassing word which actually covers a lot of different initiatives, a lot of different policies, from cemeteries to museums to war crimes documentation. And some of my other co-presentators will explain those different formats of memory work in more details later. But again, I would like to focus on processes today. So how you make sure that your memory initiatives are inclusive, how they can remember everyone and everything that happened in a way that can promote social cohesion among Ukrainians and the Ukrainian state. So to do that, we'll look closely at the linkages between memory work on one hand, what we also call transitional justice, and gender and inclusive forms of justice. To that extent, we'll cover a bit of case studies from best practices from abroad, because memory work was not born in a vacuum. It's something that has existed across contexts, across countries, across wars for a very long time. And we also look at more local examples of memory work, especially the work of, as I said, Northern Cultural Capital and Association for Democratic Development. And we will be able, to see how inclusive, how participatory, how trauma-oriented memory work can be to, again, promote social cohesion, healing, recognition of the harms that were endured. So without further ado, I'll start with our first part of the presentation. And again, feel free to interrupt me at any point if you have questions or remarks. Firstly, I would like to start with why we need inclusive memory work. Obviously, you know it better than I do, but all Ukrainians have not experienced the war in the same way. Depending on where you live, whether you live on the front lines, whether you're living in Чернігів, in Lviv, in Poltava, your living circumstances have not been the same. If you are a civilian, you obviously do not have the same stories as a combatant. Same thing with gender. Women have particular experience as mothers, as grandmothers, or as daughters, different from boys and men. Same thing with children. Children will experience the war differently from us. It's also different whether you originate from the region you live in, or whether you are an IDP, whether you've been displaced from your home, etc., etc. So it's really important to understand that these different lived realities, they will have impacts, social impacts, and especially it will create a limitation on mutual understanding. And in the long run, that can pose a threat to social cohesion. And those consequences are huge and very diverse. If you feel that what happened to you has not been recognized properly, is not being understood by your neighborhoods, by your families, by your relatives, it can lead to multi-generational trauma. It can lead to negative coping mechanisms, such as substance abuse, alcohol abuse. It can lead to distrust in the state, because you feel like you're not getting justice for what happened to you. No one recognized what you went through. And it can also create distrust among individuals in one and only community. Certain forms of violations you may have endured may also lead to stigma, feelings of shame. And there might also be, in some contexts, we've seen a competition over suffering. You may feel that you've suffered more than other people because you lived in the front lines for like 6 months, etc., etc. So if you do not address those different lived realities, these are the kind of consequences sorry, I'm seeing that I'm actually hiding part of the screen. So if society is not addressing these different lived realities, these can lead to these very long-term consequences, which are detrimental to Ukrainian social cohesion. So this is why, again, inclusive memory work, remembering all things that happened to different people, is very important. And at the Partnership Fund for a Resilient Ukraine, the fund I'm working at, we led an assessment in 2023. So we met with very different kind of people, representative from public institutions, representative from civil society, representative from the private sector. And we tried to map out what were their priorities for Ukraine as the war was unfolding. And alongside priorities such as help for the military, for socio-economic recovery, people actually told us that there were 3 goals that they wanted us to pursue as a program, and those were documentation and truth-taking. They wanted us to help them look at the past, the present, and the future, and how they are interconnected. So this means kind of demonstrate to Ukrainians, but also to the world, that this war did not happen in a vacuum again. This goes back to, obviously, 2014, but also to the Soviet heritage and to Russian imperialism. They also wanted us to look at those facts, those hard facts, document those, to actually inform what Ukraine should look like in the future, and also how we should address current needs as the war is unfolding. Their second priority was about justice and healing. We are very realistic. We know that it's a hard and long battle to get Russia's responsibility, the legal responsibility, demonstrated by international justice. We know it's also going to be a long battle to have individual perpetrators brought to justice in Ukraine or before any international court. But people are now asking for justice, so we have to find a way to provide those remedies to us. They want accountability to demonstrate what Russia is responsible for, and also reparations, both for individual victims, the person who suffered from property damage, the person who suffered from sexual and gender-based violence, the person who lost their husband, etc., etc. They want reparations now, individual reparation and collective reparation, to show what happened to their community and how it can be remedied. The last point that people told us about was about remembering and honoring. They were very strong on PFRU supporting any kind of initiatives that would remember what happened to Ukraine, but not just the suffering part. Also, they wanted us to look at the resistance and resilience of Ukrainians, because that is something we've seen in other, in past war societies, in different contexts, is that sometimes history only remembers the suffering, and acts of resilience, of resistance are forgotten. And the Ukrainians we talked with, they did not want that to be silenced. So this is how we came to work on memory and understand that, yes, the war is still unfolding, combats are still raging, but we should still look at memorialization avenues now, while people remember and are still keen to talk about what happened and what is happening. So here I come defining what is memory, and my colleagues will later again delve into the specifics. But I really like that very easy and short definition, which is collective memory is what a society chooses to remember. It is a question of choices. Who do we remember? How we remember them? Etc. And again, this relates to inclusivity. We don't want one narrative imposed on anyone, We want stories to emerge and be included in the official history of Ukraine. So I'll go briefly over this since I've talked a bit about it earlier. But a memory work, it's not just about remembering, it's also about how you do it. And the way you do memory work, memorialization, can actually be a form of what we call transitional justice. So it's not criminal justice in the traditional sense, where you get one perpetrator convicted to prison, obviously. But still, with memory work, by remembering, commemorating what happened, you are recognizing what happened to individuals and communities, and you're providing them with a sense of recognition, of symbolic reparation. Yes, this is what happened to Kolevchivka during the winter 2022. This is what happened to you individually. And we are here to recognize that, to acknowledge that, and for history to remember it. And memory work, especially in Ukraine, has been strong on diverse formats and experiences. And it's also about sharing war experiences through oral history and collection of written history. It's also about promoting a collective memory. You're not just recognizing individual stories, but you're tying them to the overall history of communities and Ukraine. You're building a connection between harms that happen to one person and see how it impacts an entire community. And also for individual survivors, for citizens who lived these events, it's a way for them to address what happened to them. They are giving a safe platform, they are giving their agency and their voice back so they can actually voice what happened. It's not us telling them what happened to them, but them actually participating in the process. And we'll look at Association for Democratic Development and Northern Cultural Capital projects. But again, there are memory initiatives where people can actually directly participate, retell their stories to external people, have their stories recorded, collected, and shared with the wider Ukrainian public, with an international audience. And that process of telling what happened, to have someone listen carefully to your narrative, to your story, is already a form of, I would say, therapy. At least you are being given formal recognition of what you went through. Also, as I said, memory is very flexible. Yes, it's about building memorials, about building museums, about how you organize military cemeteries. But again, there are very, very different memory projects you can create. And there are a lot of more informal, more grassroots projects being done in Ukraine, which come from desires, priorities of communities. And from those ideas, people are able to create oral history projects. They are able to create memorials that honor the people who are from this community and who died amidst the war. It's also about, I don't know, organizing art therapy sessions for women and girls to address what happened to them, to use art as a medium to express their own trauma and build resilience. So that's why memory is a very powerful tool for inclusivity, for promoting resilience and healing, because you can actually tailor activities to respond to different needs and priorities. And that processes of memory work actually contributes to healing, to recognition. It's not just about the end result. Yes, you have a memorial. Yes, you've published a book about stories from the communities, but you've also enabled people to participate actively in your project. And through that active participation, they are gaining something. They are gaining recognition from their peers, from an outside audience. They are gaining a form of recognition processing. And that's why memory work is especially important as the war is still ongoing. But for these to actually happen, you have to make sure that your processes are inclusive and participatory. So, for example, if you're building a memorial in your settlement, are you consulting local residents about this memorial? About what it should be about where it should be located, what it should look like, etc. Who are you commemorating? Are you only commemorating combatants who died on the front lines? Are you also honoring civilian lives lost as a result of the war, etc.? Are you looking at victims from 2014 or only victims from 2022? This is very important because you want projects to be as inclusive as possible, again, to support social cohesion. Because if people feel left out, then again, it goes back to the consequences, I mentioned earlier, social disenfranchisement, lack of trust, feeling of exclusion from society, etc., etc. Also, this goes hand in hand with the question of accessibility. Physical accessibility, like, are you building your memorial in a place where only people without disabilities can actually access it? Same thing for your museum. Are you thinking of people with visual impairment when you're building them? Because if you're not, then you're leaving part of your community out. And it's the same thing with, for example, digital memorials. It's something that is great on paper, but if you're not thinking of people who do not have access to internet, who do not know how to use that, then those people will not be able to engage with your memory products, with your memory projects. So again, inclusivity is key for social cohesion, for your memory project to have all the impact you want it to have. So that was all the theory, and I think my colleagues will again delve more in detail into these questions when they look at memorials, when we look at digital memory solutions, when we present the Ukrainian Institute recommendations on memory work. These will all be part of their presentation, I'm sure. So if there is no question at this point of the presentation, then yes, please.
Попередником подій, які зараз відбуваються в Україні, була, по суті, війна в Югославії. Ота жорстока війна з ознаками геноциду. І тоді от, Хорватія вистояла. Ну, можна привести аналогію: Сербія, Росія і Хорватія, Україна. Хорватія вистояла в тій кривавій різанині і, більше того, відстояла незалежність і звільнила захоплені сербами території. І сьогодні Хорватія – європейська держава, яка сповідує і цінності європейські, і успішно пройшла шлях євроатлантичної та європейської інтеграції. Чи є у вас досвід Хорватії? От, як хорвати, що вони зробили в увічненні пам'яті війни, але ж війна – це ненависть, це вбивство. І в той же час, як вони поєднали європейські цінності. Чи досліджуєте ви, є чимось, щось таке, чим ви можете поділитися з нами? Дякую.
Thank you very much for your question. Yes, I think it's absolutely important to look at what happened elsewhere and how they addressed the wide-scale harm that occurred as part of international conflicts or even internal conflicts. I am not familiar with Croatia specifically, but I'm more familiar with the Bosnia-Herzegovina example of how they addressed the Balkans War. And my second part is actually about that, about the international experience. how we can look at the past to inform current memory practices. And there are ways to do memory work in a way that is inclusive, that recognize international responsibility for past harm, and which promotes inclusivity, participatory approach. And I'll also talk about like counter examples of how you should not do memory work because of how detrimental it can be to your society, to your own citizens. So Croatia, I'm sorry, I can't really speak about that example, but maybe my colleagues have done research on that country, but I'm not comfortable thinking of a research country I've not worked in. But I think Chile is actually a good example. It's not Croatia, it's not part of the EU, but it has very, very different context. But it has experience with wide-scale violence, political violence imposed by Pinochet. And Chile, it goes back from very, very far. Okay, the situation was dire. But they were able to recognize the past, promote a collective memory of what happened, and give reparation to individuals and promote at the same time democracy, human rights, etc. for all. So, sorry, it's not Croatia, but maybe I can draw a comparison with the situation in Chile. So, how do you address harms of such wide scale? So, just to put some background information, Chile, it was dictatorship for decades under the Pinochet regime, which led to the political repression of thousands of people, of the disappearance of thousands of people. And one illustration of that kind of harm of political repression is the Estadio Nacional. So this football stadium was a center of concentration of political opponents under the Pinochet regime. And before the regime fell, no one can document that, what happened in that stadium, that thousands of people were locked in, tortured, subjected to sexual violence, to all kinds of tortures you could imagine. And hundreds of people died, obviously. But Chile, as imperfect as it is, it has addressed that legacy of the Pinochet regime. And it took a long time, to be honest. It took strong efforts from civil society to have the state address its past. So this football stadium where thousands were imprisoned actually worked as a stadium during and after the Pinochet regime. Today, you can watch national football competition there, whereas it was a detention center, and people died there. But under the influence of civil society for decades, you had organizations asking the state to recognize its past, its legacy, its involvement in that repression, in those deaths. The stadium is now actually a place of memory. It still functions as a sports center. You can still watch a football game there, but it's also a memorial under the influence, the hard, strong efforts of civil society. And so today,